Just say your name for me.
Adam Petway.
Perfect. There we go. Right. Let's roll. Adam Petway, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's a pleasure to finally get you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob. Huge fan of everything you do, and it's an honor to be with you.
Nah, thank you for making a little bit of time in your morning. So really appreciate you squeezing me into your schedule. Anyone doesn't know who you are, Adam, you've written a piece for Sportsman, so people should be aware of who you are. But if they're not, can you give us a bit of a brief background on what you're doing now, what you've done in the past? All the good stuff.
Yeah, sure. Great question. I've coached sport on pretty much every level. I actually started here domestically in America as a high school coach. So I coached ninth grade boys basketball, and I was also the strength and conditioning coach for the entire high school. So from there, I really found out quickly I was more in tune with the physical preparation aspect than the tactical X's and O's of basketball. So I took a Division III job, and it was kind of the opposite. I was the head of strength and conditioning, but I was also an assistant coach for the men's basketball team. And that gave me great insight and perspective what a tactical coach goes through, but I could still run, a high performance department like I wanted to. So I was doing things such as scouting, recruiting, things on the operation side, because on the Division III level, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades, so to speak. So simultaneously, while I was doing that, I was also doing a head S&C role. From there, I went to George Washington University. That was my first time being exposed to a really sound strength and conditioning department. And I learned from a guy named Ben Kenyon, who's now the head S&C for the Philadelphia 76ers. So it's kind of funny how things come full circle there. From there, I went to the University of Maryland as a basketball performance coach. I got the opportunity to learn from a guy named Kyle Tarp, unbelievable practitioner, marrying a lot of specificity and the more functionally dense side of training and physical preparation for basketball, and linking to what goes on the court. From there, I had the opportunity to work at the University of Arkansas for 5 years. That was really an unbelievable opportunity for me and my growth. I got to interface a lot with the kinesiology department on campus. That's where data collection occurred for my thesis and my PhD, working with the men's basketball team there. They had unbelievable speed, power, and track and field, which I was exposed to a lot of really high-level athletes. So that was really good for my advancement over my career. From there, I had the opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into some of the things that interest me as far as physics and biomechanics, and start some really cool projects with the Philadelphia 76ers for 2 years. From there, I went as the director of athletic performance at the Washington Wizards. And then as things come full circle, I moved back to the Philadelphia area, and I'm coaching horizontal jumps at Westchester University. So long and triple jump, and kind of interfacing with their kinesiology department on campus.
Superb. I've got a follow-up question. Before I do, just be careful of hitting the table. Hit the table just gives you a little bit of a back.
Oh,
yeah, it's fine now. It's all good. Gotcha. It's all good. It's all good, mate. So when you left the Wizards, was it ever an opportunity to stay in basketball? Was the next kind of the horizontal jump side of things something you wanted to pursue, or was it just a matter of getting back to the area that you guys wanted to live as a family?
Yeah, Philadelphia area is home for us. And then when the jumps coach position opened at Westchester, it was just kind of a no-brainer. It's something I've always wanted to do. So when I was working full-time with men's basketball at the University of Arkansas, I would coach some of the post-collegiate kids that would come back training for Olympics and World Championships. So it's something that I always wanted to dedicate myself to 100%, but just never had the time and the resources to do so.
So some cool projects coming up as well, or ongoing as well, with the jumps guys there. Can you tell us a little bit about, or should we wait a little bit till into the meat of the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we could wait just a little bit for that.
Let's do that. So in terms of, you've got the book as well. Don't forget the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Basketball mechanics. So it's labor of love. And it actually stems within my time in speed power, actually. So, probably 2014, 2015, I was working with a sprinter, a post-collegiate kid at the University of Arkansas, training for world championships. And I was just weight room, basic power development, plyometrics. We did a little bit of acceleration mechanics, but I was definitely, just S&C. And so I was like, man, I better figure this thing out, because world champs coming up, Olympics 2016. So I was like, I'm just a basketball S&C, and, I don't have much experience in speed power. So I started asking around, who can I come in and get an in-service to kind of help me out, figure, distribution of training load, menu items for desired adaptations, things of that nature. And Coach Bruce Nexsnyder just kept coming up. So, I had years of force plate data, tendo unit data, body composition data. And I was really going to impress Coach Boo with just, how thorough and meticulous everything was in the weight room. So we have him in, and he observes the session, really likes it. So at the end of the session, I'm showing all this data, and he was like, okay, what does, this athlete look like coming out of the blocks? What's his front knee angle? I was like, well, I don't know. What's his projection angle out of the blocks? Well, I don't know. What's his flight to contact time in his drive phase? I don't know. What's his pelvic position as he comes around the last 100 meters and his speed endurance qualities? Well, coach, I don't know. I'm never out on the track. And that's kind of when it hit me, like, I need to use these components that they're exposed to in their environment to kind of reverse engineer their sport if I'm going to train them in the weight room, right? So I took this model of kind of like an insight to evaluation and wanted to apply it to my sporting activity of basketball. So, I tried to read as much as I could on speed power, James Hay and the Mechanics of Athletics, great resource. Jeffrey Dyson and Sports and Biomechanics Techniques, also another great resource. So like I tried to learn as much as I could relative to the world of speed power. However, the crux is in a team sport. It's acyclical. There's 4 teammates, 5 opponents, 94 by 50 foot hardwood parameter, 2 baskets. You got to shoot a ball in. There's human error as far as like the officiating. So a lot more variability within the sporting activity of basketball. So I called up my buddy who's a tactical coach in the NBA. And I just gave him this idea like, hey, what makes a good basketball player? Like what are some distinct physical qualities that are common denominators among the world's top performers? And we just started kind of kicking, ideas back and forth. What does this look like? What does that look like? So, after several conversations, we kind of reduced it down to the game's top performers. It's all about spacing. So on offense, it's the ability to create space for a high percentage uncontested shot, hopefully from one of your best players. Defensively, in the tactical aspects in basketball, it's the ability to occupy space. So can you occupy your opponent's space as a defender to force a low percentage contested shot? Hopefully a long contested 2 is the worst shot in basketball, and hopefully you can force that from a low percentage shooter. So within that, my Ryan Richmond, who's my co-author on basketball mechanics, he came up in the video room before he was a front of the bench coach in the NBA. So we got tons of film, and we classified success as top 10 points per possession on offense as the best, like for tactical categories like ball screen situations, transition, post up offense, dribble handoffs. So if you're top 10 in the league in the NBA at points per possession, we pulled 100 clips of you doing that on ball screens, dribble handoffs, post ups. Conversely, on the flip end, it's the least points per possession on defense, right? So defensively, if you're in isolation and you allow the least points per possession in that tactical situation, whether it's ball screen defense, rim protection, isolation, dribble handoff defense, then we pulled your clips, right? And all we did was look for common denominators, right? So what do the best pick and roll guards look like when they're attacking the basket opposed to spacing the perimeter? And we just created technical models around that for the top 10 performers in the world, right? And we started to kind of pull out and see common denominators. Luckily, this coincided with right at the beginning of the pandemic. So we had ample time to complete this project. There's no doubt that Ryan and I would still be working on basketball mechanics if the pandemic didn't hit when it did. So to give you kind of context, I would go into Dartfish and just model out displacement relative to time, change in displacement relative to time. If you have the athlete's known body mass, you can kind of model out some just basic Newtonian physics to get ground reaction forces or centripetal acceleration, things of that nature. But to do one clip probably took 10 minutes, right? And we would do 100 clips per player for 10 players for 14 categories, right? So it was quite a robust project. And I'm really reaching out to people. The processing and time as far as future considerations, there has to be more of a time-friendly, economical way to do it. It's just, based on the resources that we currently have available, I think that's current best practice,
Interesting. So the book will probably come back in our conversation as we go. But what I want to have a little chat around is physical assessments, which feature in the book as well. And I think one thing to talk about and will be quite interesting, because I think not only for the younger coach, but all the way through, whether you're, like I say, beginner or veteran coach, choosing the right tests to tell you where you're going to guide your training is obviously one of the first decisions that has to be made. Understanding the sport, understanding the athlete, understanding how you want to play as a team, as an organization. So how would you go through, how have you gone through that process of deciding which assessments are appropriate for basketball?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Rob. I think, so in a traditional model, it's very linear, right? So you have essentially your assessments at top. Based on what you find in your assessments, you have an intervention. And then based on your intervention, you create an outcome measure to determine success or maybe things you need to adjust, right? That's great. However, within the discipline and sporting activity of basketball, I found that the practitioners that have the most success and influence on the environment know the tactical aspects of the sporting activity, right? Because the problem with that linear model is, okay, I might assess something like neuromuscular fatigue, right? Well, why are they fatigued in an acute state? Well, they probably had travel, maybe back-to-backs, maybe, minutes increased from a loading perspective. However, so we might create an intervention that says, okay, this athlete is a neuromuscular fatigue. We might want to increase recovery, right? But the reason they are fatigued is because an increase in playing time or an increase in training. Well, me as an S&C or performance practitioner, I don't have a direct effect on those two things. However, if I do have a good relationship with the technical and tactical staff and I can speak their language, that just makes life so much easier and potentially decreasing the amount of fatigue. You can kind of come to them and say, hey, I noticed, like, from an economical standpoint, they're taking 2 more steps than they should defending this ball screen. Or maybe, hey, in transition, instead of just running straight to the corner, their spacing isn't correct in this situation, so it's causing them to cover extra distance. Is there something we can address from either a technical or tactical component that maybe can decrease this potential fatigue state? And then it creates dialogue, right? So I think having a very centralized model and where the sporting activity from a technical and tactical component kind of peripherate out and determine what assessments you might use as a practitioner.
I've got a little quote: understand the technical and tactical aspects of the sporting activity. And this brings me back onto that's the quote that you said there. And I think it brings me back onto the multiple conversations that I've had, specifically in soccer S&C coaches who are trying to influence the head coach. And it's the same in any sport going, whether you have to be, or certain negativity around ex-players who fall into those positions and who have more of an influence because they're an ex-player. But they have that influence because they've got that technical and tactical knowledge which influences the sporting activity. So that's one that obviously you can't, if you're not an ex-player, you can't do much about it if you're not one and you're 35. But how did you start to understand the technical and tactical aspect to be able to have those conversations and feel like you were talking with confidence?
Yeah, that's a great question. My co-author Ryan would say, just always be around, right? Be in film, be in meetings if you can. And I understand there may be some political constraints with some environments where that may not be possible, but you can be out on the floor when, practice is going on instead of your laptop looking at GPS numbers, or, you can be immersed in the culture. I think culturally, being able to kind of dive deep and ask some of these more questions with the technical and tactical staff is very important from performance S&C practitioners. Not to say you have to, you know, be out there leading technical drills or drawing up X and O's, tactical plays and ball screen situations, but you should at least have a concept of what's going on. I think, this concept of insight to evaluation or basketball mechanics, it really shouldn't change your general physical preparation as a practitioner at all. You're going to have, increased relative strength qualities. You're probably going to have some basic power development. There's probably morphological or anatomical adaptations that you're going to try to address in, your early stages of training, right? However, when you funnel from general to specific, you better have some sort of technical model that you've created to address some of these deficiencies from, a specific aspect, whether it's, defensive stance is a big one in basketball. Hey, they just can't get in a stance. Well, what's your model around that? Hey, we can't move laterally. Like, our guys blowing past us every time. Like, what's your model around that? So again, the ability to have those conversations with the technical and tactical staff, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an ex-player. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be leading drills from a technical standpoint out on the court or field or pitch or wherever it is, but you better have some sort of model to address some of these deficiencies from a specificity standpoint.
Can we use that example? The athlete or the player can't move laterally.
Mm-hmm.
So if a coach came to you, if your co-author, you're working with your co-author and he came to you and said, this player can't do this, can you take us through your process to assess that, and then potentially we'll bring in some intervention as well, how you might attack that?
Yeah, so we found two deficiencies based on our ball screen defense, and we delineated guards and post. And for the audience that's not really familiar with the tactical aspects of basketball, guards are your perimeter players that are usually smaller, more compact, very quick, shifty change of direction. Your bigs are more of your underneath the basket type players, right? So we found two mechanical deficiencies within ball screen defense. One is a kinematic deficiency, hip abduction velocity, where their joints just cannot move within the frontal plane at a speed that they need to keep the defender or keep the offensive person between them and the basket, right? So you just can't move with the amount of limb speed that you need to translate right to left. The other one is a kinetic factor, right? Just magnitude of ground reaction force was also a limiting factor, typically in the guards, right? So we have a menu item of interventions based on our deficiency, right? So if it's more of a velocity thing or hip abduction qualities, right? Like we can do some one-off scrader work, we can do some frontal plane leaping, we can do some assisted type work to help with that kinematic feature, right? If it's just magnitude of ground reaction force from a lateral standpoint, well, that's easy. Like just load up a heavy sled and march laterally with it, right? So just to keep things as bare bones as simple as possible, it's, there's either a kinematic or kinetic deficiency. And based on that deficiency, we have an intervention. Typically, when you look at limb length and body type and position, that will also dictate what might be their deficiency. So meaning like some of your short, compact guards typically can move with great limb velocity, but don't produce a lot of ground reaction force. Some of your anthropometrically long femur, high hip, center of mass bigs typically can produce a lot of ground reaction force, right? However, they cannot move their limbs with the correct velocity to keep them moving side to side appropriately to evade direct line drives where the offensive person is going straight towards the rim. You have to kind of redirect that line of drive, essentially.
So in terms of getting to know those two aspects, so creating them buckets, what was the assessment process? What did that assessment process look like to understand that for you?
Yeah, so just watching a lot of film and just
Okay.
breaking it down.
Okay.
That was one, right? Because like think about it, you can do a frontal plane leap off a force plate, and you could film it with 3D kinematics and kind of have like your model based on that. However, I mean, there's again four teammates, five opponents, three referees, a ball. So there's a lot of reactive components that may influence what decision making skills they have. So I think using again in a centralized model, the game as the assessment, and then letting everything peripherate around that. So again, watching a lot of film and then having conversations with the technical and tactical staff is a great way to start, right? But let's say you don't have that luxury, right? I think you can recreate or simulate a lot of these game type situations in your assessment. Again, like lateral leap is a great way to start, and that'll tell you do it on a force plate, magnitude of horizontal force. You got hip abduction qualities that you can film and kind of build it out from there.
Was there any other particular examples that come to mind that you could run us through? Because I think this is a really nice way to go about it, because I think it puts a nice picture in people's minds. So we've got the player can't move laterally. Is there any other common questions or comments that would come to you or have come to you from coaches that you could run us through that process again?
Yeah, it's transition. I hear every coach says we want to play fast. We want to generate offense very quickly. We want to be on the attack. So they use like these kind of buzzwords. But like, oh, so and so can't run. Well, after breaking down transitions offensively, athletes in basketball really only accelerate the first three steps in transition, right? After that, they're decelerating to either evade an opponent or kind of respace tactically, run to the corner, set some sort of screen off ball or on ball. Number two is that basketball athletes are actually quicker in transition with the ball than without the ball. So like horizontal velocities are, significantly greater when a transition is occurring with the basketball opposed to when they're just spacing without. Again, I think from a general physical preparation standpoint, that's not going to change your acceleration training, your top velocity training, your plyometric training at all, right? But as you get into a specific nature, if their flying tens are going up, but the tactical coach still feels like they're not running in transition, like you need to have some sort of model to address that, right? And if you're watching film and you say, well, they're getting faster, right? Vmax is up, Amax is up as a result. Like why isn't there transference? Well, maybe it's because, where they're starting on the court in transition isn't correct. Maybe they're not running to the corner when they're supposed to. Maybe they just have no feel on where to be. So I think having context relative to the film and the tactical aspects of what's going on will kind of help you kind of move the needle just that much further. Again, from a general physical preparation standpoint, it's not going to change anything you're going to do in your training. However, if there is no transference from the athletes getting faster, compared to there's no conversion as it relates to getting more like transition buckets, having a technical model around that makes your life so much easier as a performance practitioner.
So in that transition, knowing that after 3 steps, they actually start decelerating, either meeting an opponent, meeting the end of the court, meeting the side of the court, whatever happens in that transition period. Knowing that it's only 3 steps, how does that change, or how did that change, having come to understand that? How did that change your physical preparation model to address that transition period? What did that look like? Like you say, exercise selection menu.
Yeah, so 94 by 50 feet, I mean roughly 27, 28 meters, right? So like our guys are rarely hitting their max velocity in competition, right? You'd have to run diagonally from one side of the court to the other unobstructed, right? Which never happens in competition. So really, I think from a general physical preparation standpoint, it really didn't change much at all. But using like short-sided transition games and very like clustered, where you have to make a decision right? And I worked for a coach that was really big into pressing and running. He was great at using very chaotic drills to force athletes to run appropriately in space when they ran. So again, having those conversations with that coach, I assessed, right? I had an intervention based on my assessment, but I didn't control that intervention. The tactical coach did. So I was like, hey coach, like, athlete X, VMAX is improving when we do our 60-meter sprints. Their 10-meter fly times are going up. I know spacing is an issue because this athlete's a big and he's not rim running appropriately. How can we address this, right? So again, it's having that kind of conversation with the tactical coach, because I identified maybe a deficiency based on my assessment, but I didn't control the intervention, right?
So was there any particular intervention that you could control that you implemented to try to enhance that from a physical perspective?
As far as what?
As far as them kind of the first three steps, that initial acceleration. So you've identified that is obviously a key component of how the coach wants to play. He's implementing his intervention based on particular drills and small-sided games to manipulate certain scenarios to encourage that and improve that. When it comes to the physical aspect, something in the weight room or something that you can control, what did your model look like from that perspective?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, if it's just magnitude of horizontal ground reaction force, I think heavy sleds, like 2 times body weight and just pushing for a certain like distance, probably no more than 10 meters at a time, seem to really help those first 3 steps in transition. VMAX always improves AMAX. So again, if it's just like they just can't get to speeds that they need by that 3rd step, just, your basic sprinting model. So again, just looking, are they deficient more so just in the magnitude of force they can produce in those first 3 steps, or the velocities at which they reach typically on the 3rd step is going to kind of dictate. But again, from a general physical preparation standpoint, like if your acceleration training is on point, then everything else just kind of takes care of itself, right?
Cool. Right, let's take a little bit of a right turn and go down the neuromuscular readiness, neuromuscular fatigue side of things, given your previous works. So, as you'll know far better than I do, but as well as other people out there who are working day to day with head coaches, the main question is that player fit? What state is he in after Saturday's game? What state is he in after yesterday's game? Assessing neuromuscular readiness, what options have we got to do that effectively, reliably, and that fits into a team environment?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think you have to identify, okay, there's this idea of readiness versus preparedness, right? So my last year at Arkansas, we tested athletes just doing a jump test 15 minutes prior to practice and 15 minutes post practice. And we used our fatiguing model as just the training. And we just wanted to look at how different volume and intensity affected the effect size on the retest post practice, right? And what we found was that certain metrics were, on an acute readiness standpoint, were very sensitive to neuromuscular fatigue. From an absolute standpoint, or the chronicity of the season as a whole, some of your absolute metrics were stable, but would uniformly rise and fall just based on the time of year. So again, I think when you tease out and you pull out different kinetic metrics for neuromuscular readiness to assess, fatigue, what we found is match day -1 pre to post in the effect size, when reactive strength index increased, 24 hours prior to competition, so did the athlete's peak speed in game the next day, right? So from a neuromuscular readiness standpoint, reactive strength index is a byproduct of flight to contact time, or a temporal metric, rose and fell uniformly with in-game peak speed. So if a coach comes to me and says, okay, Adam, are our athletes ready for competition tomorrow, and we're match day -1, I'm probably going to look at, reactive strength index or some sort of temporal metric to gauge neuromuscular readiness within our athletes, right? However, when we looked at seasonal variations using the same methodology, we used peak power, relative peak power, and jump height. absolute metrics, right? So no temporal component, right? Just peak power relative to body weight and jump height. Very stable metrics. They didn't fluctuate on a day to day like impulse or RSI are things that are time dependent. So if a coach comes to me and says, Adam, is this athlete more powerful? And maybe it's the off season or preseason. They want a marker of longitudinal progress over time. Then I'm probably going to use relative peak power because it's a stable metric, and when just looking at like early season compared to later season, it did not fluctuate, right? So it gradually decreased relative to density of competition and time of year. However, when you looked at a day to day or pre to post practice, it was relatively stable. So if a coach comes to me and says, "Are we progressing over time? Are we getting stronger? Are we getting more powerful?" I'm probably going to look at some of my absolute metrics like relative peak power to gauge preparedness or assess the chronicity of effects of training. If a coach comes to me and says, "Are we ready for competition? Like, are we ready to go?" Then I'm going to look at RSI. I might look at eccentric deceleration impulse or something that's more time dependent to gauge where we are at for that moment of time.
Was there any particular aspect that you saw within RSI in terms of which side of the ratio was changing to enable that RSI to fluctuate to allow you to answer that question on an acute basis?
Yeah, so it was essentially ground contact time, right? So jump height, again, being a very stable metric, the same. It's just, were they getting off the ground quicker relative to their individual norms?
So looking at outcome, I mean, there's a lot of talk in the research as well as in applied practice with outcome measures versus strategy measures, and you've mentioned both there. Is there any particular reason why you wouldn't go down just the jump height route? I know there's been a lot of work over the years. Stu Cormack in pre 2012, 2013 around that kind of work. But is there any particular reason why you wouldn't just go down the jump height route and use that as the measure to try to understand and answer that question of are they ready or not?
Yeah, no, you could absolutely do that, but I think if you're just using jump height as your metric, again, just it being very stable, depending on when you pull it out, you may be missing a little bit as it relates to neuromuscular fatigue, right? So yeah, it is a very stable metric. There's tons of valuable information you can get by just using jump height, and relative to the environment, maybe you don't have a data scientist to process all 45 metrics you could pull out from a force platform, or let's say you don't even have a force platform. Let's say you just have a jump mat and a vertex. I think jump height and using jump height as a status for neuromuscular readiness can be a very effective tool. However, based on previous research that I've done, it seems like it's such a stable metric that maybe it doesn't show the whole picture of neuromuscular readiness or that snapshot of where that athlete is in time.
So we've talked about jumps and using force plates. Is there anything completely removed from the jumps, removed from the force plate, that we could potentially use to try to understand neuromuscular fatigue and readiness?
Well, so in my current role, yeah, the outcome measure is built into the sport, right? Jump distance, right? So are the athletes jumping further relative to their norms? So some of the pilot studies that we're currently doing with our cohort of men's and women's track and field athletes, we just have Hawkins Dynamics plates right there trackside, and we're replicating the methodologies from our studies with basketball, but doing it in a track and field in a cyclical population, right? So yeah, the three questions that we're looking to answer: throughout the training week, right? Triple jump is a brutal sport. Biomechanical studies have shown that you're producing, ground reaction forces up to 12 times body weight on a single leg in the transition from your first to second phase. It is an absolutely mechanical, brutal sport. If I compete on Saturday, what's the residual time that it takes me to return to neuromuscular baseline, right? And how is that individual compared to each jumper? And how is that individual relative to the event-specific groups, right? The ground reaction forces that you produce in an 800 are completely different than a long jump, right? Throwing, sprinting, hurdling, vaulting. These are all such physically different sports. What's the refractory time of recovery, right? The second question we want to answer is, do these metrics uniformly rise and fall with performance outputs? Meaning, again, RSI, competition day -1. If it increases relative to my normative values, does that mean it's a predictive measure for me jumping longer or jumping higher or running faster? The third question we want to answer, and this is a really interesting one, is event-specific metrics that are significant for each cohort of athletes. Meaning, like, okay, we know that like our throwers are 2 standard deviations away from the norm as it relates to like impulse and momentum, right? However, if you look at our jumpers, it's completely opposite. Reactive strength index, they're a whole standard deviation away from the average of the group as it relates to reactive strength components. So what does it look like for each event specific group, and what metrics are most important to that group, right?
So the big question, how close are you to having some understanding of trying to answer those 3 questions?
Very close. So we just concluded data collection for our outdoor season. We're collaborating with Hawkins and probably should have these manuscripts out within the calendar year. So again, scientific process takes time, but we're much more closer to having answers to these questions.
Can you give us any insights?
Yeah, no, I think so just using median split analysis, I think you can say that in sprinting and jumping, stiffness qualities are a principal component as it relates to delineating talent identification between your really good jumpers and your not so good jumpers, right? B, I would say uniformly, there is longer residual effects as it relates to neuromuscular fatigue in certain events compared to others, right? So meaning distance runners compete on Saturday. They're probably ready for a high neuromuscular day of training the next week within 48 hours. A lot of our jump crew and sprinters, that is going to be a lot longer time period and time course, right? So if you want to look at your intervention being like, okay, I know we're going to have to hit a high neuromuscular day within our microcycle, you can use your neuromuscular assessment and the return to baseline as a proxy to serve when that falls within the training week. Is it 4 days after? Is it 5 days after? And how is that going to affect the following competition, right? So again, having depth over width in your assessment, I think being able to test something every day kind of gives us the power and the autonomy to kind of tease out what's significant.
And how have you seen the individual differences in that residual, especially for the sprinters and jumpers who may go on multiple days? What's the individual differences?
There are high versus low responders, for sure. There is individual variance, but when you start clustering groups as a whole, you start to see trends and patterns, right? One interesting thing, and it's a shame because it's an N of 1, but multis are good at everything, right? So we do a counter movement jump, a rebound counter movement jump, and a repeat hop, right? And typically, like for example, the reactive strength qualities of your throwers are horrible, but their impulse and momentum that they can generate in a counter movement jump is unbelievable because it takes time to generate a lot of force rotationally to throw a shot or a hammer or a disc, right? However, when you look at multi-events, right, and it's a very small sample size, but it's something we want to investigate in the future, they're not deficient at any metric in any 3 of our evaluations. And, I have hypothesized that it's because that they have to do so much within their events, right? So next year, there's actually a multis only competition, and I'm going to just try to bring the plates there and see if we can't get all the multis people and just get the whole cohort to test the hypothesis.
So what were the 3 assessments that you just mentioned that you were using for this?
Yeah, so counter movement jump, counter movement rebound jump where we just do 2, and just like a pogo, like a high frequency hop or an ankle stiffness bound for 5.
Nice. Excellent. Right, I reckon we move on to the final kind of major point in our little chat here, and that's managing Achilles issues in basketball. Am I right for someone that knows nothing about basketball that would be a particular common issue that you would deal with in a high performance environment, dealing with ankle and Achilles issues?
Absolutely, yeah. So ankle sprains and Achilles are, an epidemic within basketball. You're going to deal with that with a high rate of frequency, either acutely, like somebody steps on their foot, sprains an ankle, not uncommon, or from a chronic issue like Achilles tendinopathy. Again, especially in your older athletes, is going to be something at some point within your career in basketball that you're going to deal with. So currently, actually, our former medical director from the 76ers and I are collaborating on a project right now, just examining Achilles tendon ruptures within the National Basketball Association. And what we found is since like 1992, there's been roughly 33 Achilles tendon ruptures. And we just wanted to look at, okay, what are known factors involved with this, and what's the distribution of known factors? So when we looked at, chronological age, playing time, training load leading up to injury, we found that, older athletes are more at risk, it seems like. So the average age of an NBA athlete is around 24. The average age of an NBA athlete to rupture their Achilles is like 29 and a half. So, we also just wanted to pull film, and we used the same methodologies as we did for basketball mechanics and just looked at mechanism of injury, right? And what we found in Achilles tendon ruptures is that there's a very distinct profile as far as it relates to mechanism of injury, right? So it's kind of like a false step or a negative step, as it refers to in the literature, where the athlete, when wanting to project their center of mass horizontally, actually takes a step backwards and then has an extreme range of ankle dorsiflexion and trunk flexion associated with that, right? So to ranges up to like 47 and a half, 48 degrees of ankle dorsiflexion, and trunk flexion up to like 42, 43 degrees. So those two mechanisms within a false step was consistent 100% of the time across these injuries when evaluated for a 30-year period, essentially. So when looking at that, we say, okay, we want to hit because it's trained within the technical aspects of basketball. You train that negative step, you train that false step, right? So if athletes are going to go there, they need to go there with a stiff, rigid foot, and where they don't go to end range dorsiflexion to create kind of contingencies. When if they are going to go there, at least they go there in a very safe, protective manner and mechanism, right? So getting into things like isometric training at that range, where the foot is very stiff and very rigid to handle those ground reaction forces, is very, very important. So we're still, again, working through that, but that is just a trend we found. We started that project probably last fall, and it's something that should be out here again in the next couple of months.
So when it comes to day-to-day not management, but potential looking at prevention of this type of injury, you mentioned isometrics there. Is there any, how would that fit in? How are you creating those exercises? What kind of positions are you putting athletes in to make sure they've been there before, but they've been there before in a safe environment? So when they're in a chaotic environment, it's nothing too much of an issue.
Yeah. So I think, again, going back to the centralized methodology, I think, and one thing that I didn't realize until breaking down the film is conversations with the technical staff is crucial in this one, right? Like, so your player development coaches, if they're not identifying that mechanism and repping it the correct way, you can do all sorts of isometric calf raises and, soleus and gastroc work you want in the training room and the weight room, which we do. But if it's not addressed with the technical coach, usually there's no carryover there, right? Where the athlete's just going to kind of take the path of least resistance. And when they're teaching direct line drives with the false step or negative step, they're going to hit the ground with kind of a loose, flaccid foot. So I think two things. You do all your, training room and weight room work, but also having dialogue within the context of the technical development staff, because they are going to teach that false step and negative step to do it with a stiff, rigid foot where they're not going to in-range dorsiflexion.
So is that just a case of educating the technical coaches for what for cues to use? Is that changing particular drills so it forces athletes into that? How does that work on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think it's a component of both, right? So I think there is an education process. You probably don't want to come in with in-range dorsiflexion and creating stiff for horizontal ground reaction forces. But if you show them film's always like the common denominator because they have chunked enough enough images of athletes doing certain movements that they're highly skilled at that. So if you can show them like, hey, like here's what we've seen in the past, right? And here's the positions we want these athletes to avoid in their technical development training. I guarantee you that coach will be able to pick up on that right away. Like the technical and tactical coaches are very, very intuitive and very smart for the most part.
Just touching on that the isometric side of things, what you just mentioned there. Is there any other aspects of isometrics that become useful in those types of environments? Especially, I'm just thinking around how jam-packed the schedule is and how isometrics may fit into this prevention but progression physical development model in the NBA.
Yeah, no, I think isometrics play a huge part. Because I think low impact and high reward. But B, they're very easy to teach. You got to think if you're 7 feet and you have a 3.5, 4 foot spine, right? Like there's certain positions that are just going to be hard for you to get in. So I think, low impact, easy to teach. So I think when you look at risk reward, doing a lot of isometric work, particularly for your plantar flexors or knee extenders, like that's money. Cause it's not hard for those taller athletes to get in those positions, but B, the residual effects you get from managing tendinopathy is exponential, right? So I think there's huge benefit to doing isometrics in an 82 game NBA schedule for sure.
Superb. Right. Firstly, where can people keep up to date with some of the projects that you've mentioned that you've got going on? And secondly, where can people get access to the book?
Yeah, so we should have some of the research projects out here in the next couple of months. We just produced a really good paper on training load that's through the International Journal of Strength and Conditioning using that same year. It was actually a 3-year study just looking at training load versus our outcome measure of closing point spread differential, or like the betting odds to gauge in-game performance. With the book Basketball Mechanics, you can just go on ultimateathleteconcepts.com and Joseph Johnson's site and just purchase the book there. And it's available on Amazon as well.
So was that self-published? Is that the way you went and it's on Joseph's site to sell, or was it through his publishing?
It's UAC, okay. So it's through his publishing.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. We'll take that offline because I'd like to know the process and yeah,
absolutely.
Cool.
For sure.
Right, mate, I'm going to let you go, but thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate the last 50 minutes and diving into some of the stuff that we have, but look forward to keeping in touch and we'll chat soon.
Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Adam.
All right. Cheers.